This podcast is supported by Americans for Medical Progress through the Michael D. Hare Fellowship, awarded annually to support projects that inform and educate the public about the critical role of animal research in furthering medical progress. The fellowship honors the late Dr. Michael Hare, a renowned board-certified laboratory animal veterinarian who dedicated his career to scientific and medical advancements and who is deeply committed to animal welfare and advocacy. In this 9th episode of Lab Rat Chat, I had the pleasure of talking with Dr. Javier Guillen all the way from Spain about the various laws and regulations surrounding animal research in the European Union. And as you can see, if you take a look at the length of this episode, it takes the title of our longest episode yet. But trust me, it's full of a ton of information, and Javier does a really great job of summarizing the major differences between the United States and the EU in really a short amount of time that we gave him. So thank you, Javier, for speaking on behalf of the European Animal Research Association, and everyone else, please just sit back, relax, get comfortable, and enjoy this 9th episode of Lab Rat Chat. Welcome, everyone, to episode number 8 of Lab Rat Chat. If you haven't already, and as we say every episode, please subscribe to our podcast. Leave us a rating, a review, a comment, whatever you can. This really helps us in growing the podcast, and it really only takes a minute of your time. And to be honest, I didn't really see the point in doing this for all the podcasts that I previously listened to, but now running one of our own over here, it's easy to see how the more subscribers and listeners we have for our show, the more ratings we get, the more likely we are to be able to continue support, to cover some of the costs with production and editing of the show and all of that. So, and a big thank you to everyone out there who has left us comments, who is sharing the links with family and friends and telling family and friends about the show. It really does make a difference. So thank you all very much for that. And moving on to today's episode, again, we don't have Danielle with the coronavirus situation still going on here in the US, and everyone still at stay-at-home orders and people still working from home. So as soon as that's all lifted and Danielle can get back to work and daycare is back open and things resume normally, we'll have Danielle back. So until then, you still just get to enjoy my voice. And on today's episode, we're going to take a little different approach here, as we have focused a lot, or really only, on animal research laws and regulations in the United States. And we actually had a comment that was on Reddit of all places mentioning how regulations differ in various parts of the world. So I thought, why not take a minute or take an episode to address some of that by taking a look into the world of biomedical research over in Europe. So joining us today all the way from Spain is Javier Guillen, an expert in the field and someone well-versed in European animal research regulations, an area I don't know a whole lot about, and I'm excited to compare and contrast some of these differences with Javier today. So welcome to the show, Dr. Guillen. And if you could just tell our listeners a little bit about your background, what made you interested in veterinary medicine, about laboratory animal medicine, and just describe your journey to where you are in your career today.
Well, thank you very much, Jeff. First of all, I would like to thank you for this opportunity to participate in this Lab Rat Chat podcast, which I think it is a wonderful initiative. About this first question, I've liked animals all my life since I was a child, and later I saw veterinary medicine as the natural way to go. I went to college in a vet school in Zaragoza, in a city in Spain, and during those years, when we were studying that degree, the veterinary degree, we had 3 different choices. One was veterinary medicine. The second one was bromatology, which is basically food science, and animal production. And I chose medicine, veterinary medicine. At that time, there was almost nothing, if any, education on lab animal science and medicine in the veterinary schools in Spain, either in the graduate or even postgraduate studies. So there was basically nothing that could make me lead or make me feel interested in the lab animal science and medicine. However, the first work I could get when I finished my studies was in another university in my city in Pamplona, in the University of Navarra, as part of a neuroscience research group that was using macaques, non-human primates, more specifically Macaca fascicularis, one type of macaque focused on the study of Parkinson's disease. So I was there for some time, for a certain number of months. And I think I must admit that my entire career, professional career, was influenced by that, I would call it aleatory event, because that was my first job. That was it. After a few months asking myself what I was doing there, in this university, collaborating with research and taking care of the research animals as well, I started liking this field. And I was also lucky in the sense that after a little bit more than 1 year, I could take care of the entire animal care and use program. I was offered the job to take or to manage the entire animal care and use program at that university. It was a complex program, having all kinds of species, rodents, rabbits, macaques, swine, sheep. We could even have woodchucks and other species. And the typical situation there is that, as in most of the other institutions at that time in my country, in Spain, there were no other veterinarians who could mentor me in how to manage that program. Traditionally, in Spain and in many countries in Europe at that time, animal care and use programs were handled or managed by either a senior technician or experienced technicians who took care of the animals, or one of the professors or animal users having projects and having to manage the other details of the program. So I didn't have other veterinarian to teach me, so to speak. But I had to learn, and I don't know how to stay quiet. So I started learning, joining associations. Obviously, one of the first things that I did was to join the Spanish Association for Laboratory Animal Science, SECAL, that had been established very recently. At the time, it was late 80s, early 90s, the time period I'm talking about. And one of the things that I did too, I remember perfectly this thinking, the Americans must know a lot about these things. And I explored and I found the American Association for Laboratory Animal Science, ALAS, and I became a member of that association almost at the same time than to the Spanish Association. And I kept learning the following years. Through the Spanish Association, I became involved in other organizations, such as, for example, the Federation of European Laboratory Animal Science Associations, FELASA. I became a board member. I stayed in the board of FELASA for many years. And I also joined AILAC International as an ad hoc specialist. AILAC International is an international organization that accredits and evaluates and accredits laboratory animal care and use programs internationally. And they rely on independent professionals in different areas of the globe. And I became one of the specialists to help with the evaluations. And later, shortly after that, I was also elected to the AILAC International Council on Accreditation, which is the group of professionals responsible for the decisions on the accreditation. That was in parallel with my job at the university. And after a few years as council member, and when AILAC wanted a person full-time to lead the European activities, they offered me this job. And I have this job since very early 2008 as director for European activities. And currently, I also take care of the activities in Latin America, in Africa, and the Middle East. I have also maintained, in parallel, participation in other organizations. In addition to FELASA, that I was there for many years, I am in the board of other organizations such as ICLAS, the International Council for Laboratory Animal Science, Laboratory Animals Limited, which is a charity in the UK that publishes one of the most important journals in our field called Laboratory Animals. And more in particular, I am also a board member because AILAC International was one of the associations founding this association of the European Animal Research Association.
That's quite the extensive background you have there. And I think you deserve a lot of credit for figuring out a lot of the information you need to be successful in this field on your own, it sounds like, and seeking out the information you needed, the people you needed to talk to, and everything along the way. And you've done quite a bit. It's very honorable, all the organizations you've been a part of and all the work that you've done to contribute to the field. So thank you for that. And I have to say, I've worked with a lot of laboratory animals, and I've heard about different uses of lots of laboratory animals. I think woodchucks is a new one to me. I've not heard about the use of woodchucks in the laboratory. That's interesting. So today you are speaking to us on behalf of the European Animal Research Association. So could you tell us a little bit about this organization, their vision, and what their mission is?
Sure. EARA, the European Animal Research Association, was officially established in 2014 by a few organizations from the public and private sectors in the field here in Europe. AILAC International, our association, was one of those. I think we were about 12 organizations in the very beginning, and it crystallized in 2014 with the official establishment of EARA. And now we represent 90 organizations across Europe in 16 European countries, from both public research institutions and private institutions, other representative bodies, public and private biomedical research, including also breeders, other suppliers to the sector, all kinds of organizations that somehow have some interest or participation in the care and use of laboratory animals. So as you can see, this organization has grown a lot since it was established just 6 years ago. The vision of EARA is that the understanding and recognition of the importance and benefits of research involving animals across Europe is acknowledged by a significant majority of society, allowing for a more constructive dialogue with all stakeholders and a more efficient and dispassionate climate for research. Our mission is to become the leading European voice for the life science sector, academic institutions, associations, and industry that use animal in research for human, animal, and environmental benefit. As I've briefly explained, EARA was created by academic institutions, associations, and the industry to provide a European platform for public and other external stakeholders to be informed and learn about animal research, its benefits and limitations. And by providing accurate and evidence-based information of biomedical animal research, EARA will inform and educate audiences in support of necessary research and will facilitate a balanced debate on the role of animals in scientific research. Being a European-wide organization, EARA will encourage the creation and development of national networks and bring coordination in between. So basically the work of EARA, this mission focuses on, we could summarize in 4 items. One could be to better inform and educate audiences on the continued need for and benefits from the humane use of animals in biomedical research. The second one could be to coordinate national and international efforts to create a favorable climate for animal research by addressing European Union and national political decision and opinion makers. Also to lead pan-European initiatives to counter pressure on the laboratory animals supply chain and the license to use laboratory animals in research, and also to support the efforts of animal research facilities to access the goods and services needed to discover and develop new medicines and treatments for humans and animals. EARA, in practical terms, activities that we are doing, EARA is also helping to maintain, obviously, the supply chain for animal research. For example, we are helping and supporting a complaint in the US relating to airlines not transporting animals for research. EARA is also assisting member institutions with Brexit issues, the problems that Brexit can raise in between the UK and continental Europe. We are providing guidance on how to approach non-technical summaries, and we can discuss it a little bit later too, are one of the European legal requirements in terms of transparency. All projects must include a non-technical summary with lay language to be understood by the public, and these non-technical summaries have to be published by the government, by the competent authorities. EARA is also collaborating with the European Commission. The European Commission is we could call it like the European government, okay? On a study on openness too, relating to the presence of public statements on animal research in institutional websites. We are also helping with openness and transparency agreements that we may discuss later as well in different countries. And another particularity of these current times of COVID-19, EARA has put together an interactive map to display the biomedical research currently underway across the world to find a cure for coronavirus. The use of animals in basic research and to help develop drugs and vaccines is vital, and this highlights, based on World Health Organization data and EARA sources, where animal research is being conducted and the species being used in the different studies where it is known. And using icons, our map charts the institutions involved in the basic research needed to understand the disease, drug, vaccine development, plus the sources of funding that can make it possible.
Well, I hope you all have quite the number of people over there willing to work on all of these tasks. That is a significant number of tasks and quite the large vision and mission that you all have. That's really, truly amazing. That will only help Europe and the rest of the world understand and realize the importance of animals being used in biomedical research. On this podcast, we've talked a lot about the various laws and regulations surrounding animal research here in the US, as you could imagine. So could you break down maybe some of the few big differences between the United States and Europe or the EU when it comes to the different laws and regulations?
Of course. Before that, I would like to remind people that Europe is larger than the European Union. I'm going to focus in the European Union legislation, but I just want to remind people that there are many other countries in Europe which do not belong to the European Union. Some examples can include well-known countries like Switzerland or Norway, even Russia, or now the UK. So while the European Union, now that the UK has left, is or has 27 countries, the Council of Europe, which is a bigger organization, has 47 members. That's one thing, but we will focus on the European Union legislation. The European Union can issue two types of pieces of legislation. One is called regulation. A regulation issued by the European Union must be adopted literally by the member states, as it is. And directives, the second piece, are called directives. Directives give some time, not only time, regulations can give some time too, but can give some space to or room to the member states to transpose them into national legislation. And in that transposition process, there may be some differences on how these directives are implemented into national legislation, which gives or which produces certain type of practical differences on the ground. Okay, these are the two concepts that I wanted to highlight. The directive that rules the care and use or the protection of animals used in research is Directive 63/2010. It was in year 2010. And during the following 3 years, it was transposed into the national legislation of all member states. Which are the most important differences with the legislation in the US? Obviously, I'm sure that you will know that in the US, you have explained that you have already discussed these matters. Legislation in the US comes from both the USDA, Department of Agriculture, or the Public Health Service. Obviously, the animal welfare regulations under the USDA do not cover rats, mice, and birds, which would be a very significant difference, but all vertebrates are covered under the Public Health Service policy, the PHS policy, where we can discuss the differences, because the first one is that in the European directive, in the European Union legislation, animals covered include not only living vertebrates, but also independently feeding larval forms, which is an interesting point because that may raise some discussions on, for example, when a zebrafish is covered or not. There is a consensus that this should be, for example, when they are 5 days old. But also, the European Union legislation directive covers fetal forms of mammals as from the last third of their normal development, and also, importantly, live cephalopods, which makes a difference. It is not the only legislation now in the world where cephalopods are covered, but they are not covered yet, at least, in the legislation in the US. On the ground, maybe the most visible difference is the requirements for cage or enclosure size, for the minimum cage or enclosure size, especially for certain species. For example, for dogs, the minimum surface of a cage or any kind of corral or pen where dogs can be housed, the minimum space are 4 square meters, which may be 8 depending on the size of the dogs. In the US, instead of having these minimum surface requirements, they go by a minimum surface per animal, which makes the possibility or offers the possibility to have dogs in smaller spaces. And very importantly too, is that regardless of the number of dogs, for all dogs, there must be here in the European Union enclosures or cages 2 meters high, which is a big difference, a very obvious visible difference, because in the US, dogs can be kept in smaller cages. The same would apply, for example, to non-human primates. In the European Union legislation, the minimum height for a cage is almost 2 meters. It is 1.8 meters. the minimum surface space is 2 square meters. And we also talk about volumes. And the minimum for a macaque, I'm talking about the most common primate species, which are macaques. The minimum volume for an animal would be 3.6 cubic meters. That makes that when you visit animal facilities in Europe, you will see dogs, primates, and other species normally in bigger cages. This is not so evident in rodents. Differences in rodents are less significant, but it is quite visible for other species. That makes a difference. If this was a concern when these requirements were established, because institutions were concerned about the monetary impact. But in the end, it has not been so bad, because at the same time, we must have animals socially housed, except for very much justified exceptions. So in the end, even if you use larger spaces, but you house the animals socially, in the end, institutions are not needing so much extra space. Other differences may be that the European legislation refers explicitly to the 3 Rs, the principles of replacement, reduction, and refinement. And there is even an article dedicated to the 3 Rs, and they are mentioned in other articles along the directive. And there are some requirements in terms of advice by the animal welfare body. The animal welfare body is a body that all institutions must have, all users, not exactly like an American IACUC, an Institutional Animal Care and Use Committee, but with some similarities. And these animal welfare bodies must follow up the implementation of the 3 Rs, give advice on the 3 Rs, etc. There is also another important difference which refers to the use of non-human primates. The use of non-human primates is restricted to certain purposes of research, which are defined bullet by bullet in the directive. And also the way to move to the use of exclusively second generation, what we call F2 animals, which is offspring of non-human primates that have been already bred in captivity. And also when an institution is using non-human primates or has a more frequent schedule for inspections by the competent authority. When I say competent authority in legal terms in Europe, it is what you call in the US the regulatory agency, to understand each other. There is also a list of species that must be purpose-bred for research. And this list is quite extensive, and it does not include only the usual rodents and non-human primates or dogs. Other species such as, for example, frogs or zebrafish must also be included, must be also bred for research. Another point relates to cosmetics. In the European Union, for many years, there is no way to use animals to test cosmetics, but not only that. Since 2013, cosmetics even tested on animals cannot be marketed anymore in the European Union. There is another important difference in terms of transparency. There is a very detailed way to produce every year the statistical reporting on the use of animals for research by each institution. These are very complex tables. There are official forms where institutions have to include a lot of information on the use of those animals, including by purposes of research, severity, etc. And as I was saying before, all projects must be accompanied by a non-technical summary summarizing what the research is about and how the 3 Rs are implemented in that study. And those non-technical summaries are published officially by the regulatory agencies, by the governments, by the competent authorities. And the last one that, if you wish, we could discuss a little bit more in detail is the ethical review process, what it is called in the US, the protocol review process.
Yeah, and I also just want to point out too that a lot of the cage sizes that you were mentioning, and you did say you said it yourself that they're the minimum cage sizes. A lot of institutions, I know at least here in the US, are exceeding the minimum, which kind of goes back to some of the ALAC accreditation and ALAC standards as well, and which we've talked about before on the show. But yeah, there are minimum standards, but most institutions exceed them. I even in class a couple weeks ago, we were looking at some dog runs, and it was a really nice dog run. It had 2 levels to it. It had mirrors, toys hanging from the ceiling. And it turned out it was from a breeding facility for research dogs. And everyone was had their mind blown by that, because going into it, you thought it was some luxury suite that these dogs were staying in. And that's what it looked like. So I just wanted to point that out. But yeah, going back to the animal research protocol review process, what you said interested me. Are these reviewed and approved similarly to how we do it here in the US? Is there an institution level review happening at each site? Or is there like a national review committee that's reviewing these animal research protocols in each of the EU member states? Or is it happening, again, like I said, independently at different research institutions?
Well, first of all, I would like to agree with what you were saying about these differences not impacting, which is something that I always like to say, the outcome of what we are doing. I think that regardless of the legislation in place, either in the US or in the European Union, the professionals make things go in the same direction. Okay, we share the same principles. That is a very important thing. And that applies to all the program areas. Concerning the ethical review process, the protocol review process, I think the main difference is, and this is a very personal opinion, it is a cultural thing. Because in the US, it is under the direction of the Institutional Animal Care and Use Committee at the institutional level. That is the most important actor in the protocol review process. And I think, as I was saying, this is a cultural thing, because in the main difference is that in the European Union, the competent authority, the regulatory body, takes a much more active part. And I think in terms of different culture is that in general, and for many other aspects in life, I think that in the US, they give more autonomy or more initiative to the individual, to the institution. And while we in Europe are more used to having the umbrella of our governments, okay? And that reflects that cultural thing, that general cultural difference. And this is, again, a personal opinion, is reflected also in our legislation, in how the protocol review process is performed. In the European Union, there may be up to 3 levels. The directive gives the competent authority the responsibility to do this evaluation. Instead of protocol in the European legislation, they are called projects. And the project evaluation responsibility is given to the competent authority. However, there is an article in the directive, Article 59, which allows competent authorities to designate bodies other than public authorities of the implementation of certain tasks, only if there is proof that as the expertise, infrastructure, and that they are free of conflicts of interest. So many member states have used this at their convenience. And in most of the member states, the competent authorities, the governments, have, let's say, designated other bodies or allowed other bodies to do the equivalent to the protocol review process. Many of these animal welfare bodies, or called also ethics committees in many countries, may do the project evaluation at the institutional level. But even if in all countries that is performed at the institutional level, the evaluation, the final authorization of the project or protocol is performed by the competent authority. So, as I explained before, during the transposition process of the directive, there are countries who have maintained a little bit more participation at the government level, but others have relied more at the institutional level. But the third potential level is the external level. In certain countries, for example, in the Netherlands or in Spain, there can be external bodies, independent bodies, having the necessary expertise and being free of conflicts of interest that an institution can, let's say, hire to do the protocol evaluation. And later that evaluation is submitted, that project with the evaluation already done is submitted to the competent authority for the authorization. Only in Belgium, both evaluation and authorization can be done by these local bodies. In summary, in the European Union, there are 2 different processes, which are evaluation and authorization. And in most cases, the evaluation in most can be done at the institutional level, while in others is also done at competent authority level. But in the end, except in Belgium, the authorization is granted by the competent authority. And there are established time periods to produce that, which in normal condition will be 45 days after submission of the project to obtain the authorization.
Thank you very much for providing that summary. It's nice to hear some of the differences that are occurring over there compared to over here in the US. But I want to keep going with a couple more things, or really one big topic. And it's something that many of us believe, the biomedical research sector here in the US really needs to focus on is openness and transparency. And you've already talked about that. And we've said this plenty of times on the show before. The necessity of animals in research becomes 100% clear when you see why these animals are being used and the results that are being produced from the research. So can you tell us a little bit about the transparency agreements, as they're called, that have been put in place by EARA?
Yeah, transparency agreements are actions, projects coordinated or agreed by private and public institutions willing to provide the society with an informed opinion on when, how, and why we use animals in research. The first one in the European Union at that time, was established in the UK in 2014 after several organizations started discussing this in 2012, and it crystallized in 2014 with the UK Concordat on Openness on Animal Research. This Concordat is organized and managed by UAR, an organization called Understanding Animal Research in the UK. And I will summarize the four commitments of this Concordat because they have served as the basis for the rest of the agreements that have been established in Europe. The first one is that we will be clear about when, how, and why we use animals in research. The second commitment that signatories commit to is that we will enhance our communications with the media and the public about our research using animals. The third one is that we will be proactive in providing opportunities for the public to find out about research using animals. And the fourth one is that we will report on progress annually and share our experiences. So one of the aims of EARA, when officially founded in 2014, was to promote the establishment of national networks, as I've explained before. And one of the outputs of these networks should be, in EARA's opinions, the implementation of similar type of openness agreements or transparency agreements. The first successful project took place in Spain in collaboration with the Spanish Society and the Spanish Confederation of Scientific Societies called COSCE. So in 2016, this COSCE agreement for transparency was also established. And allow me please 1 minute to comment on the terminology because I've had discussions when explaining this in the US, because some people in the US are concerned about the use of the term transparency because they may think that absolutely everything has to be in the open when we all perfectly know that that's not possible in the research environment because of sometimes biosecurity reasons or proprietary rights, etc., etc. So it is normal that in the English environment, the term openness may be better than the term transparency that others are using. So now in Spain, we have 142 signatories. It was established in 2016. Portugal was the second project where EARA played an important role. Okay, it was established in 2018. Now there are 18 institutions. We have managed to help with the agreement in Belgium, established in 2019, and we are also helping, EARA is also helping in Italy, France, Switzerland, and Poland. We don't have a goal in terms of numbers, just the more than we can get, the better. The way to do it, there is the need to link the efforts of the laboratory animal science community, the people who are, let's say, taking care of the animals, with the users, and also to link the efforts of the public with the private sector. When we manage to get that coordination and we identify an organization leading the project in each country, that can take place, as it did, for example, the UAR in the UK years ago. So what EARA is doing is helping to put these groups together in other countries. The annual reports in the UK and in Spain, the agreements having a longer history, show actions that had rarely taken place in the past. Visits to institutions, very active participation in public events, and increasing the relationship with the media. Sometimes it is as easy as to include a reference to the animals when discussing research advances in the press. There are press releases, etc. Putting a practical example of the Spanish case, we would have never believed 4 years ago when we established this agreement that the 142 signatories have a public statement in the website recognizing and explaining the use of animals in research. This would have been unbelievable just a few years ago. And very interestingly, there are already conversations in the US led by American for Medical Progress, AMP, to explore the possibility to develop such an agreement in the US. Several meetings have already been held and working groups being established. It may be more complicated due to the size of the country and the big number of institutions involved in research, but the first steps are being taken.
Well, that's great news to hear. That's what I was going to say is we need something similar to these transparency agreements over here in the US, obviously modified accordingly to fit the United States. But like you were saying, the more open we are, the more transparent we are, whichever term you would like to use more, I think it will only help gain the trust of the public. And there's still so many institutions that are trying to be secretive and about the animal research that goes on. I don't know if secretive is the right word, but the more open you are, I think it would cut down on potential protests by the opposition or acts by opposition, and would only help gain the trust of the public once they can see the benefit that the animals are playing in research and the care and compassion that these animals receive within these animal research facilities. So touching on that, on public perception, what's the public perception like over in Europe? Which I know that's a very broad statement to make, given the vast differences in many of the countries. But in general, compared with the United States, do you think these transparency agreements are helping in acquiring and maintaining public trust?
I like to be optimistic, and I think they are starting to help. In the US, the opinion polls show a constant decrease in the acceptance of animal research. There is one by the Pew Research Center showing the difference between 2009 and 2018, showing that the acceptance dropped from 52% to 47%, while those opposed to grown from 43 to 52. Another very long poll by Gallup shows a steady decrease in a graphic about if medical testing is morally acceptable or unacceptable. And while the acceptable is decreasing steadily, the unacceptable is growing, and they are about to intersect in the middle of the graphic. In the European Union, there are no opinion polls at that level, and I may have to refer to the only ones that I know, which are in the UK, as usual. And those polls were showing a decrease also in the acceptance from 76 to 66 in a poll published in 2012. And this decrease, I don't know, we don't really know if it is because of this concordat on openness in the UK, but this decline in the public acceptance has stopped since it was established. And now, since then, it has been kept in between 65-68% on the acceptance of the use of animals in scientific research for medical and scientific purposes, respectively 65 and 68%. Yeah, it is there. So I want to be optimistic and think that may be an impact of this openness that the public is seeing. I think it is very important to note that 2/3 of the public do not feel well informed about the use of animals in research. And that is a very important thing. Normally, they don't know what this is about, and their opinions are sometimes based more in feelings than on real facts. Curiously, also now due to COVID-19 and in a more recent poll performed by UAR in the UK in March this year, this 60-something% had increased up to 73% of people who thought that it was acceptable for scientists to develop tests, treatments, or vaccines for COVID-19 using animals. A large proportion of, in this case, UK public accept the use of animals for research as long as there is no unnecessary suffering and there is no alternative. So between these openness and transparency agreements, and now because of this situation with the COVID, people are or may become more aware of the importance of the animals in research.
Yeah, I hope that's the case. There's definitely been lots of talk about use of animals in research surrounding the COVID-19 pandemic. And going back to what you said about a lot of the public not knowing about animal research at all, the use of animals in research at all. That's the whole reason why we started this podcast. Because I had my own family and friends, when I'd ask them about it, kind of cock their head sideways and look at me strange. And the only thing they would know about the use of animals in research, they would apply to the use of animals, the use of cosmetics testing on animals, and didn't really realize how the medication they may take for their migraine was developed on an animal model. But to wrap this up, so our final question really is, we always ask our guests how they describe what they say to people when they're asked about what they do for a living. Whether you're at an airplane or some sort of social gathering somewhere, do you tell the potential strangers that you're around or family, friends, what you do for a living when it comes to the animal research component? You're a veterinarian, so it's a little different, but what do people have to say about when you say you're laboratory animal veterinarian? And how do you approach and handle it professionally? These kind of questions and these kind of responses help our listeners, I think, too, the ones that are in the field, help them feel more confident and help them develop ways to tell individuals what they do for a living, in a professional and responsible way.
Yes, I can tell you that I have shifted in my type of response over time. I must admit that in the beginning, and for many years, I must admit I was very shy when describing my job. I gave a very, let's say, nebulous response. But as the time has passed, I have learned to speak much more openly. And when you do that, you realize that if you speak clearly, giving reason-based opinions, facts, many people understand that much better. As you were saying, too, people don't really know what this is about. And there are maybe people who still think that scientists take animals from the streets or from wherever, do whatever they wish with no control. And that thoughts are still there. When you speak, when you are asked and you start speaking about what you do and the framework in which animals are used, you can feel other people's different feelings about it, okay? Based on their facial expression, or they may speak up, they can voice their opinions. I think the matter is that we have to be convinced ourselves that what we are doing is something good for people, animals, and environment. Again, as we have been discussing today, many people don't really know when, why, and how animals are used. When you explain to someone all the regulations and ethical oversight, they are really surprised. Sometimes, at least in my experience, these type of conversations may arise when traveling, obviously meeting new friends, etc. It's a matter just to be open, clear in the communication and explain it well. And these other people will have a better informed opinion when later talking to others, and will realize what is behind of what the drugs they get at, or what is behind of the drugs they get at the pharmacy or the treatments at the hospital, or even the same for their pets. So I think it is an extremely good thing. I've passed my evolution too, and I'm trying to be as much more open as I can. And I would suggest that everybody in our field do the same thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's really a great opportunity to help, educate, inform the public in a way. It's just the simple answer to the question about what you do for a living. Finally, Dr. Guillen, do you have any final statements or thoughts on things that we haven't previously covered that you think the public should know regarding truths of humane and ethical animal research, or anything about the laws and regulations in the EU, or just simply any other topic you'd like to talk about?
Well, just a short comment that I may have already mentioned briefly. I think this is not a comparison between the US and the European Union. I think it is a global thing. And there are different legislations in different countries, in different geographical areas in the world. There are even areas where there is no legislation at all. But we all, at the professional level on the field, we share the same principles exemplified by the 3 Rs, irrespective of our legal framework. It is like a performance-based approach. We can achieve the same outcome, which is basically to provide a humane and ethical treatment of animals in research to produce quality science through different means. In terms of legislation, we were discussing the differences between IACUCs and our ethics committees or similar. But in the end, what we share is much more than the practical differences we have in the way of legal implementation on the ground. That is the main message. It is extremely nice to see sometimes in countries having no legislation at all, how the professionals, the user, the veterinarians and other professionals try to establish their own internal ethics committees or equivalent similar to IACUCs and do things the same way we do. And we can see that very easily in our activities in ALAC International. And that's what also EARA is promoting in the European environment in terms of communication.
Yeah, 100% agree with all of that. Thank you for clarifying. Thank you for taking the time out of your day to come talk to us on this episode of Lab Rat Chat. Thank you to everyone for listening, especially if you made it this far. I mean, this topic is very important to talk about the different regulations and laws that are occurring in other places throughout the world, and to talk about the importance of animal research globally. And so just real quick, I don't want to take up any more of your time. If you haven't already, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter and Instagram. We're on all the social media platforms. Our Twitter handle is @TheLabRatChat, or you could email us any comments or ideas you have for future episodes at labratchat@gmail.com. Take the time to leave us a comment, review, tell family and friends about this so we can continue to grow our number of subscribers and continue to grow the podcast. So again, thank you, Javier, for coming on the show today. We really appreciate your time.
Thank you to you.
All right, have a great day, everybody. We'll talk to you on the next episode of Lab Rat Chat.